This is the Plugin Alliance Lindell Audio 902 De-Esser, and this is based on the very famous DBX 902 De-Esser hardware. So let's dive in here and check out all of these parameters, see how to use it. But before we do that, let me point, okay, and make a funny face, like a really confused face, so I have something for the thumbnail, because apparently that's what you do today. You look all confused and you point at something, I don't know what I'm doing, and it doesn't make any sense. It's like you just made an entire video about this plugin. You're not confused about it. If anyone's going to be confused, it would be the viewers, because they don't know about the plugin yet. Why are you looking confused? I'm confused and don't know what I'm doing. Let me point at it. This whole industry is stupid. I've had it and I'm done. It's just, the whole industry is just stupid. Look at, I'm confused and pointing. Shut up. Anyway, but this is a really cool plugin, so let's go ahead and check out how it works. First up, we have the in button. If I turn this off, we are removing the de-esser from the circuit, so we are bypassing the plugin. You can, of course, bypass the plugin in your DAW as well. But for now, let's turn off the de-esser. Listen to this section.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
All right, so some really harsh S's in there.
This is some kind of game.
So let's turn on our de-esser. We'll leave this on the default setting for now.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
So we have already de-essed this signal, leaving everything on the defaults, and we don't really need to adjust much more from there. So for now, let's skip over our high frequency only mode and head down to our frequency knob. Now our frequency knob is going to select where are we searching for those S sounds. It's not just reducing it around whatever we have it set at, So if you have it set at 2.5K, which for general de-essing, this is where it is suggested that you leave this knob. But we're not just de-essing around 2.5K. It's de-essing in a much wider band, a much wider range to get those S sounds, sometimes T sounds, ch sounds, sometimes F sounds, anything that's really high in content that's annoying and very sibilant. So don't think if I set this to 4K, we're only de-essing 4K. We are not. What happens whenever you set this frequency knob is it splits the audio signal into high and low frequency portions for evaluation. So the 902 detects sibilant material by comparing in dB the high frequency level of an audio signal and the full bandwidth level of the signal. So when the high frequency level is excessive relative to the full bandwidth level, the 902 will de-ess. And because it's comparing the difference in level between the high-end content and the full spectrum or the low-end content, again, set up here whenever we split our audio, we don't have a threshold control. So that means even if you have quiet areas of your audio, it's still going to properly de-ess that without having to juggle some threshold control. So that means if this audio was very, very quiet, set my frequency there.
Do you think that this is some
We're still getting
kind of
proper de-essing
game?
in this quieter area and this louder area.
Can't stop to think and say.
Okay, so that is what your frequency knob does. You're not just de-essing in just this area. Again, you're setting it for essentially where do you want to search for those S's. All right, and again, in general, just leave it at about 2.5K and adjust for various voices. Now, if you're doing other things like trying to de-harsh a guitar, maybe some pick sounds or some really harsh cymbals or something else, then of course play around with this. But let's move over here to the listen section. We have output, detector, and de-ess. So the normal mode, where you're going to leave it most of the time, is output. So on output, we're going to be able to hear the output of our de-essed content.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
So for her, I'm actually going to move this up just a tiny bit. But over here on our detector, then we're able to hear that filtered signal, or the signal that we're using to detect those S's. So let's hear that.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
If I move it down here,
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
we're still, of course, detecting those S's because our frequency is not just de-essing the area we have this pointing at, again, it's splitting that audio signal and we're just telling it where to search for the S's. So in her case, we don't need to search for S's way down here because we're getting the body of the voice. So let's pull it back up. Well, let's pull it way up here just to hear it.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Pull it back down here again, one more time.
Do you think that this is
Right.
some...
No reason to be that low. So again, for her, a little bit higher than this 2.5K. And again, it's going to de-ess in a much wider range than just, around 2.5K.
Do you think that this is some kind of...
Okay, so that's our detector signal. Onto the de-ess. Now the de-ess lets us hear the portion of the audio that was removed by the de-esser. And that's pretty good. We don't want to be grabbing things, that we don't need. So you can use your detector and your de-ess setting to help you dial in your frequency. Come back to output over here, and then we'll come down to range. And the range is essentially the amount of de-essing that you're going to have. So the amount of audio that you're going to compress down or make much quieter so it's not sticking out. Now, in general, you want to leave this in the normal range for standard de-essing. You may need to raise it a bit depending on the material. But again, if you're doing things like guitars, cymbals, or other instruments that you want to de-harsh, de-edge, then you can, again, play with this a bit more. So we're right here in the normal range, which sounds pretty good.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Now, again, for her, since she is so sibilant at the top end, I'm going to pull my range up a bit.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
And you can confirm that amount of gain reduction by that red line here. So look at this.
Do you think that this is some kind of
If I pull it down here.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
So we're not getting any reduction.
Do you
pull it way
think
up.
that this is some kind of game?
And we're getting a lot of reduction there. So real quick on the graph, if you see white areas that are fully transparent, that means there's not really any high frequency content in there. As they get more white and more opaque, that means there is some high frequency content in there. And whenever it starts to get yellow, that means there is a lot of high frequency content in there.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Okay.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
And again, that red line is our gain reduction. So it's doing a very good job here. Again, for her, I'm going to pull it up just a little bit more. But one thing you want to watch out for whenever you're de-essing is you don't want to go too far. It's actually better to under de-ess than over de-ess. Because if you over de-ess, you end up making your subject, the performer, whatever, sound like they have a lisp. So you can really hear that up here.
Can't stop to think and say.
Now I'll really overdo this. And instead of saying can't stop, it's going to sound like she's saying can't stop. Okay, can't stop. We're crushing those S's so much that we're making her sound like Sylvester the cat.
Can't stop to think and say.
Can't stop to thinking they, which is not what you want, right? So let's pull that back down.
Can't stop to think and say.
Much better. Again, it's better to slightly underdo it than to slightly overdo it. Then we'll come over to our mix. Now, it's actually pretty cool to have a mix in your de-esser because this lets you do things like over de-ess and then pull in some of that original signal, that unde-essed or just unaffected signal, and it can sound more natural than just having that full reduction. So let me go slightly over where I need to be for her.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Okay, so you can really hear it pumping down the level in those areas. Too much, but I can mix in some of that original signal with the de-essed signal, and now it sounds much more natural.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
So we've still removed the S's, but by letting through some of that unaffected signal, again, it just sounds a bit more natural. So in this case, that's still too much in the range. So I'll pull it down a bit, and I will dial in this mix knob down just a bit. You may want to try this for yourself. You may want to start leaving it somewhere around 95, 85%. Just let a little tiny bit of that unaffected signal through. And again, it will sound a little bit more natural. Then we have an air knob, and this is a smooth, high-frequency boost that can help us recover some of that brightness that is reduced whenever we de-ess. So just dial that in like a high-end EQ filter if you want to restore some of that brightness.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
So it's already doing very well here, but we can pull in a little more brightness if we want. I'll over-exaggerate it here.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Okay, we're just making it.
Do you think that this is some kind of game?
Making it a little bit brighter there. It's nice to have that control, and really nice to have that mix control in here. So now we'll look at the HF only mode, and this in general is only used for de-edging or de-harshing instruments. It's not really used for standard de-essing uses. So for the most part, if you're de-essing a vocal, leave that turned off. What it does is allows the 902 de-essing action to affect either the entire audio bandwidth, which would be the normal mode, or just the high frequencies only. Okay, so again, normal de-essing, leave it off. If you're doing something like we have a guitar down here, for example. And we're using this de-esser to get rid of some of the hair on the top of this guitar, but you could also use it to de-edge your cymbals or de-harsh your cymbals, or if you have guitar pick noise, for example. If I take this off the high frequencies only, we'll listen to the content that's being pulled out by coming over here to the de-ess. So you can hear that it's getting some of the body of that guitar. If I turn on the high frequencies only, just that, then we're only getting the top end de-essed or de-harshed. Okay. Again, if you are using this for standard de-essing, just leave that turned off. So now we have a spoken vocal, or like a podcast vocal, or a YouTube video vocal. So of course you can use your de-esser on sung vocals or spoken vocals, or for other instruments as well. I will bypass it for now. I also have the Lindell Audio Channel Strip 50 series on here. Let me bypass that too. So just the vocal. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses. Okay, so that vocal doesn't sound too bad. The S's aren't really sticking out too harshly. But what if we add EQ and compression to that? She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on. Okay, so now it's not quite as good. Those S sounds are popping out and becoming much more present. So we need to de-ess this. And again, pretty simple to do. You can leave it in the default setting whenever you first open it up. Check out your vocal. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome. Okay, so it's already done pretty well. But in my case, because this is my vocal here, for my voice, I need to turn this down just a bit. Let's hear our detector. She sells seashells by the seashore. Because in my voice, there's a lot of shh in that lower range. So that's why I'm taking this frequency down, so it can search for those S's in a little bit lower of a frequency range. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on. And here are de-essed. Yep. There we go. And again, adjust your overall range. For this, leaving it in the normal range seems to work pretty well. She sells seashells by the seashore. Going to reduce the mix just a tiny bit. She sells seashells by the seashore. A little bit of air. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on females who sell seashells by the seashore. And we're canceled. Okay. Now you may ask, where should you put your de-esser in the chain? And the actual answer is, it doesn't really matter. It just depends. So right here, we have our de-esser before our channel strip, which is, our EQ and our compressor. Some people prefer to do it the other way. They like the full frequency, the full spectrum to be run into the EQ and then run into the compressor. And then they like to de-ess that resulting signal. Let's check that out. I'll move my de-esser. Bada bing, bada boom. onto the other side of my EQ and compressor and take a listen. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on females who sell seashells. Does a great job. Again, move it before my EQ and compressor. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on females who sell seashells by the seashore. And we're canceled. Okay, so as you can see, as you can hear, it doesn't really matter where we place our de-esser. It just depends on what you're doing and what works for you. So anybody telling you it has to be after the compressor, it has to be after the EQ, they don't know what they're talking about. Now, if you put your de-esser in front of your EQ and compressor, just understand what you're doing, okay? You are de-essing the audio first, and then you're feeding that resulting signal into an EQ and a compressor, or just a compressor, or just the EQ, whatever you're doing. So you're feeding an affected signal, a de-essed signal, into an EQ and compressor. So that is the signal that's going to be triggering your compressor. Again, other people like to do it the other way around. They like that full spectrum to trigger their compressor, or they like that full spectrum to EQ first, and then they want to de-ess the resulting audio. You can do it either way. You can do whatever sounds best or works best for you. It doesn't matter. Whatever works. I've said this before. If it sounds good, it is good. Okay? There are no rules when it comes to this stuff. So put your de-esser wherever you want, wherever it sounds best. Now, in general, you're not going to be placing your de-esser after reverbs or delays or choruses or flangers or modulation effects, right? In general, those should be last, right? But as far as EQ and compression goes, you can really put your de-esser wherever you want. She sells seashells by the seashore. Welcome to the only podcast that focuses on females who sell seashells by the seashore. And we're canceled. All right. Next up, across the top, you have your A and B settings. So you can set up different settings, A and B. Between them, you have an in and out knob, so you can drive the input or reduce the input, drive the output, reduce the output. She sells seashells by the seashore. Drive that in harder, turn down the output. She sells seashells, turn up the output. She sells seashells by the seashore. Alt-click to set those back to the default. We can hide our graph right there. She sells seashells by... Okay. Click your hamburger menu, and here you can set your calibration. Most people will leave this exactly where it is. We have oversampling. Now, right now I'm on 4x and it's performing just great. The default is 2x, but you can go as high as 16x. And this is to help reduce what's known as aliasing. So the higher you go, the technically better it would be. But of course, it comes at the cost of CPU. So if you're trying to use this in a live situation, like for your podcast or something, you have a whole plugin chain that you're speaking through, you probably want to leave it on 2x or even turn it off. Okay. Then we have noise. So because this is based, modeled after the actual hardware, the actual DBX 902 hardware, they also modeled the noise. Okay. Now you really can't hear the noise. Let me just show you here if you can see this right there. You can see a little bit of level in that right there. Now we can't really hear it. Let me turn this up as high as I can. Still can't really hear it, right? So let me come over to this track up here because I already have an EQ on this track. I'll boost it way up. Okay. We have the noise turned on. Again, you can't really hear it. I'm going to come over here to this EQ, turn that on, and just jack the gain on this. So now maybe you can hear it a little tiny bit. Let me jack some more level into this. There we go. So you can actually hear hear that noise now that's generated by the actual hardware. But in general, you're not going to hear anything because again, we have this boosted 24 dB here, 18 dB here, and then like an extra 12 dB here. So again, if you set this to your defaults, you're not going to hear anything at all of that noise. But if you want to turn it off, you can completely turn it off right here. You'll also see things like set in all instances. So if you have multiple instances of your de-esser, you can change these settings and set it for all of those instances. You can save it as a default. So it just opens up to, those settings. You can turn your graph on and off over here. So turn it off here, but of course we already know we can do that right here as well. And then we have our UI zoom. So down to 80% or up to 150%. And lastly, you also have an external sidechain that you can turn on right there. Again, set that up however you do it in your DAW. All right, so that is all of the parameters here. So of course, as I've mentioned several times, you can use your de-esser on things other than vocals, although I'm sure most people will just use it on vocals. But again, you can use it on drums, you can use it on guitar, you can use it on other percussion or synthesizers or pianos. Anything that has some harshness that you want to get rid of in sort of an automatic way, you can use a de-esser on that. So here we have it on some drums. I'll turn it off. You can see all of that high-end content in there. Turn it on. Okay, so now we have destroyed our drums. And why is that? Because we're de-essing, we're deharshing way too wide of a range, right? Even though we have our frequency here set at 3.5K, we're still getting de-essing in that lower end, or deharshing or compression in that lower end. So make sure I turn on my high frequency only. Now it's much better, right? Let's go to our detector. And then the De-Ess. So that's what we're getting rid of. If I turn that HF off, you hear all of that low end content that would be getting reduced. And that's why I focused on that frequency knob for a while, because again, you're not just choosing the range that you're going to de-ess. Again, it's actually going to de-ess in a much wider range than you're setting. This is just where we're looking for those S sounds, or that harshness, that high-end harshness. And if we don't want to de-ess in any of these lower ranges, anything on this side, then we can turn on the HF only button. There we go. Reduce that, a little bit of air, turn on the mix. There we go. So now we have deharshed our cymbals without destroying our drums. Okay, so that is, again, your Lindell Audio 902 De-Esser. If you want to pick it up for yourself or learn more about it, head right over here to pluginalliance.com and you can buy it over here. And you can also get it as a part of the Essential Bundle, or the Mix and Master Bundle, or the Mega Bundle, which is what I personally use and what I was personally suggest that you get, because this is one of the greatest bundles, subscription bundles, that you can subscribe to. The amount of things that you get with the Plugin Alliance Mega Bundle is insane. It really is. It's a really cool bundle. All right, so again, this is the Lindell Audio 902 De-Esser from Plugin Alliance, based on that famous DBX 902 De-Esser.